everyone, and welcome to Dean. Today we'll be discussing the decline of the cod, and to help us out we have two guests, Mrs. Big Four Offshore and Mr. Inshore. Welcome.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you for being here. So to start our discussion off, I will give you a short overview. In 1992, there was the single largest layoff in Canadian history. Over 20,000 Newfoundlanders were laid off as the cod stocks were being threatened. The cod fishing industry collapsed under the operation of scientific management, and since then the cod have never recovered. This moratorium was expected to only last 2 years, but the cod have never rebounded. And so this moratorium still remains in effect today. So our first issue we'll be discussing is your current perspectives on our current accounting systems. So how do you feel about this, Mr. Inshore?
Well, currently, scientific management has completely failed the cod industry. The management technique that's been used has been the catch per unit method, and that is where scientists determine how many cod can be taken from the ocean while leaving enough to reproduce the following year. And this number simply includes leaves out too many variables, and therefore is inaccurate and has led us to the state we are in today.
Interesting. I completely agree.
I have to disagree.
Why is that?
How else would we determine how much fish we're allowed to fish if we didn't have a model to build from that?
Well, where I come from, the local fishermen have studied the patterns of cod from generation to generation, and the knowledge has been passed down, and that is simply how we understand the behavior of the cod.
It doesn't seem that that's a very reliable source of data. I would like to see your historical evidence for success in that method.
Well, I mean, we don't have any historical evidence. However, we have fished for centuries on this method, and it was not until the scientific management came in until the cod started being depleted.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view. I must say I side with Mr. Inshore. Before this gets too heated, we're going to take our first commercial break, and when we return we'll be discussing some more issues to do with the cod. Alright, welcome back everyone. We're going to move on to our second issue now of regulation. So it's demonstrated by the cod populations that we not only need regulation, we need effective regulation. The scientists' management failed because they were using unrepresented models to manage the cod to determine how many cod could be removed while still maintaining a healthy population. These models left out important variables, either due to sheer ignorance or deliberately ignoring them, and they were used to promote profits and keep unemployment rates low. So I would say that we need regulation by a party who serves everyone's interests, not just those of a specific party. I'm going to ask Mr. Offshore, how do you feel about this topic?
Well, according to my calculation, regulation is not necessary. The market is already strong form efficient, and we don't need people coming in and telling everyone what to do when the experts in the field should have the discretion to use their own ideas of how the market should be run.
Well, if I could jump in here, I don't believe that's true at all, and I think you need to look no further than the accounting industry to realize that regulation is needed. I mean, look at market failures such as Enron, WorldCom, even Waste Management. These are all huge failures of the market that cost a large amount to society.
Yeah, but if you think about costs, who's going to come in and pay for all these market regulators? Who's going to incur the cost of that? There's a trade-off here.
No, that's true, and I don't have all the answers, but I do believe that the costs that would be bared removing these, in providing regulation, the costs that would be needed to provide regulation would be much less than those that are being borne by society in the event of such failures.
I completely agree with you, Mr. Inshore, and I personally believe that people are opportunistic, and a lot of people just focus on profits and they don't take into account other stakeholders. So personally, I believe that we would need independent regulators, something similar to FASB perhaps.
I agree, Dean. I think an independent body is needed to ensure that all interests are served, not just those of a particular group, maybe a dominant group.
Well, I think the market captures all of this information, and you don't need a specific independent body or external party.
Well, also looking again at the cod industry, there was no regulation in the cod industry, and I mean, look what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, so some interesting points have been made, and we're going to move to our second break, and we'll see you guys when we return. Welcome back, everyone. We're now going to turn to the cod industry and examine what I call lumpers and splitters. Lumpers believe that cod populations function as a single reproductive unit, while splitters believe that there are several cod populations in the ocean. So, how do you guys view lumpers and splitters in the accounting world? Mr. Offshore?
Sorry, I just gotta check my model.
Of course he does.
Well, I believe IFRS is a very great way for financial statements to be comparable and understandable by across industry and across countries.
But do you feel that these standards are appropriate for all industries, or are they producing irrelevant info? I mean, could excessive lumping lead to misdiagnosis of the needs of various companies, users, and markets?
Dean, I think that's a very good point. I take a splitting approach to the standard setting approach, and I believe that a global system of financial reporting is inappropriate. I believe that it should be split down, and there should be different regulations, different standards for companies of different sizes. I don't think that a company operating on a multinational scale should have the same reporting requirements as, say, a private company. I think private entity GAAP is a much better alternative for some companies, and even just GAAP in general. I believe that companies in different industries also have different needs, and these needs need to be recognized by different standards for them.
What about globalization? How does globalization affect having all these different types of reporting standards? How would you compare between countries if you have all these different types of reporting standards?
Oh, that is also a very good question, but I mean, if this information is irrelevant to the user, what is the point in comparing it? And that brings me to my next point. I also believe that the financial statements should be split onto a wider scale to incorporate the needs of various users. I mean, a banker doesn't necessarily have the same needs as an investor or the management of the company. So I think splitting needs to be examined.
All right, perfect. Well, we're running out of time for this section here, but when we return, we'll have more information on the cod industry and the view of our accountants. Thanks. Moving on to research, we saw with the cod stocks that attempting to calculate maximum sustainable yield was not possible with the models used. The models were unrepresentative and therefore produced pretty much useless information. There were so many variables to consider, it was difficult to measure and consider each one and put them into the models. Despite this, science was still determined to turn the cod problem into a solvable problem. So, Mr. Offshore, how do you feel about this in the world of accounting?
Well, I believe that the market follows the critical market research theory viewpoint, in that as soon as information is released into the public eye, it is immediately incorporated into the stock price, and the market is efficient. As I had stated earlier, we don't need regulation, it is self-regulated.
Well, I mean, with all due respect, I could not disagree more. Well, I mean, there's market anomalies such as the day-end effect, the January effect, the bubble, as well as a lot of noise traders that are present in the market. These noise traders act on impulse and fail to consider all available information. So, I mean, with actors such as these, I don't think they could be considered rational, and with their presence, is the market really efficient? I turned to a good friend of mine, Richard Thaler. He actually goes by Dick, and his model of behavioral finance for a more accurate assessment of accounting research.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I also am quite a big supporter of Richard Thaler's behavioral finance. I had no idea you two were so close. So that...
Can we wrap this up? I have a real big meeting with Ken Lay coming up here pretty quick.
All right, Ken Lay from the grave. You hear that, ladies and gents? So we're gonna wrap it up here, so Mr. Big Four can get going and cook some books. So thank you for stopping by. Next week you should tune in. We're gonna be covering in vitro fertilization and its effects on the accounting world. So yeah, you stay classy.